One of the things I've been spending time doing is just being okay with not doing anything. Happiness, it's not in the external. I'm standing in my own way. Nobody's standing in my way. Yes, there's some bigger things and factors we can't do anything about, but there's a lot of things that I can, in terms of just the way I think about myself in the world and how I orient myself in the world.
Welcome to the podcast, Tapping Creativity, with myself, Matthew C. Temple. And each week, we're going to dive into questions and issues and inspiration around creativity and the creative process. So, hey, welcome to this week's episode of Tapping Creativity. I'm joined today by Iman Nazemzadeh, who's both a very good friend and a very talented artist and creator and actor. If you are just joining us, we have actually a special first part of this particular podcast. And so you can go back and listen to it if you want to know how we got here, because we are right in the middle of a Taiwanese tea ceremony. And we're using this space to really just open up to see what's going to come into the space in our conversation. So I won't rehash what we did on the first part of that as we set ourselves up here. But here we are. And if you want to hear how we got to this serene moment, go back and listen to part one. Otherwise, we're going to go right into a conversation with actor and artist Iman Nazemzadeh. So for those of you who don't know Iman by name or even by face, you've most likely seen him before. If you've ever seen NCIS, if you've ever seen 24, if you've seen Captain America, you've seen his face. And I think one of the things that's so important to have Iman on the show is that Iman shows up as an artist, as an actor, day in and day out, without necessarily some of the recognition that some of his peers have found. And I think one of the things that is really profound as an artist, an actor, a creator, is showing up to be of service and showing up for the work, showing up understanding that you are on a journey, on a hero's journey, and that the success in some ways of the hero comes at the end of the story. And for most of us, we are in the middle of our stories, and therefore there's this place that can sometimes feel like a very, very long, all is lost moment, a very long wandering in the forest, a very long, period in the desert. But that's what the life is, and that's the life of an artist and a creator. And this kind of question came up, and I thought, I want to do this tea ceremony as part of the podcast. So here we are in this moment. And so really, so welcome, Iman. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And wow, what a beautiful and humbling introduction. It makes me think of exactly where I'm at right now. You said this place where you're lost in the forest and you don't know exactly where you're headed. You're in the middle of your hero's journey. And I couldn't relate to that any more than now in my life. And I feel tea has sort of picked me up and has brought me to this conversation. So I don't know if I would have been able to have this conversation without tea, if it wasn't for tea. And if you hadn't been here and sat with me, for those 2 days and communed through tea. So I just want to say that I am so grateful and honored to be here. I'm humbled and I'm always inspired by you and what you have to offer and your clarity around so many things that just give me so much insight. So wow. I'm here to learn, I'm here to explore, and I'm here to offer anything that I've picked up along the way.
Lovely. Wow. Well, that's quite an introduction for the host. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm sure your listeners already know that about you, having listened to the previous podcasts and the guests that have been on the show. So,
well, if they haven't, if they missed it, they know it now. So So actually, I'm inclined to, well, there's two places I'm inclined to start. I think where I really want to start is, I mentioned you're an actor, but for anyone who's watching it, obviously I think most of our listeners are listeners, but if you are watching it, behind you right now is a beautiful painting of a woman's face. And anyone who's been fortunate enough to spend time with you in your home knows that the walls are adorned with these beautiful paintings. So tell me about that process. Like, and also how does that fit in? You're an actor and it's a part of your livelihood. It's a major part of your identity as both a human being, as an artist, as an actor, but yet you also have this kind of ridiculously wonderful talent as a painter. So how do those things kind of play in? And tell me about your painting and how it plays into the bigger picture of Iman, the artist.
So I feel like it might have been from a past life, because I didn't take any class on how to paint, what medium to use, or any of that. When I was living in London at the time, I would pick up comic books or landscapes and I would just directly sketch what I was seeing. And it was, pretty accurate from what my point of view was. And, but that was all with different levels and shades of pencils and sketches and, markers and this and that. So, and really small scale. I didn't get into painting and trying to figure out like what I'm capable of until 2008. And like any cliched cathartic epiphany that you get, I was going through a very difficult time in my life. And it was going through a very big heartbreak. And it became a way to express and to deal with what was coming up for me. And it was funny. I was staying with a family friend at the time. I was living in my own space, but I couldn't be alone. The only way I can be alone was to paint. And then I would go back to my family friend's place and stay at their place. And this was happening for 2 months. But I found the medium. I started with oil pastels, and like I said, that was about 11 years ago, and it was trial and error for me. But the medium itself gave me a sense of control. So if I was using an oil paint, I didn't have control over the colors and how I wanted to manipulate certain hues and, how I wanted to paint the painting. So oil pastels gave me a way to, number one, work with my hands. Most of the paintings that I have here are all oil pastel, except for this one. This is the first one that I did with oil paint.
Interesting.
Straight oil paint with a brush. The rest of them were just with my hands.
Interesting. So I've seen those before, and I always thought they were oil or acrylic. I didn't realize they were actually oil pastels.
So the detail, which they're all abstract portraits, the portraits itself, they're all oil pastel. What's behind them, the background is acrylic. And acrylic was one of those things where I can say, okay, I can paint the background without going into any detail. And then the detail work I'm going to do with my hands. So I did use a brush for the first part of it, which was just acrylic. Every one of these paintings, for me, what was important to keep me going was if it was inspired by an event. It was inspired by something. It meant something to me. It got me out of my bed. It got me up from my couch to do something. Now, people say you don't have to wait to paint or to get up and create via inspiration. You just get up and do it every day. And some days it's tough to do it because you don't want to do it, but you still do it. But for me, and this is why I don't have that many paintings, and it takes me such a long time to paint these paintings, is because, number one, it has to mean something to me. I can't just do it for the sake of doing it. But also, when I'm in the middle of painting, it's meditation, it's therapy. I get completely lost in the painting. It's the one creative process for me that I lose complete sense of time. Okay. If 7 to 8 hours will go by and it'll feel like an hour and a half. Right. It happens every time with these paintings. I mean, when I paint, I'm up till 4 or 5 in the morning painting. Okay. Because I'm just losing sense of time.
What's interesting, you aren't a painter, you didn't train as a painter, and yet Your paintings are gorgeous, but it sounds to me like you weren't painting for a particular end. You were painting simply for the sake of painting. Is that correct?
Well, it started that way.
Okay.
And then it started to form into, oh, wait a second. I'm going to paint women and children from the Middle East, and it's going to be symbolic to the environment that they're in, meaning their hijab that they're wearing is going to be an element of their environment, of their oppression. And so it began to, and after the first painting, that became very, very clear to me. And then I said, you know what? I would love to do 10 paintings and have an auction, and then take 10, 15% of whatever I make and put it towards a charity that goes towards battered women and children.
Okay.
But that wasn't planned. That came from a heartbreak that then went to a painting. Then I was inspired by pictures. And my process is usually I'll spend probably about 2 weeks pulling, when you're starting to direct your attention to something, everything around you, the universe sort of works in this way. Everything starts to appear, what you need, or what you're exploring. So colors, flowers, images, I pull them. I'm tuned in to what I might find out in the world. I'm also pulling different magazines. So I'm seeing different models and poses and which one speaks to me? What do I want to work with? I'm looking at multiple facets for about 2 weeks before I get into the painting.
So that's really interesting about like where your inspiration, this kind of other idea, but I want to separate it a little bit from you as an actor, because as an actor, that's your career. That's where you've trained. Yeah. That's part of your livelihood, but this is not. So I'm wondering kind of the relationship a little bit of like how that feels differently to be painting than it does to be acting.
The moments where if I'm in the middle of a painting and I have an audition or I'm in acting class, I'm a much better actor and more tuned in when I'm painting.
Okay.
Because there's an identity that comes with me as an actor, and I'm sure that other actors may speak in this way, expectations, whatever the story is, that might get in the way of my creative work. Because being in this business, number one, the business is very different from the creative process in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the things I've had a very challenging time trying to learn and understand. And maybe that's one of the reasons some of my peers have done much better than I have, because there's certain things that are formula that you sort of tune into and it works and you do it. For me, it hasn't been like that. With painting, they're completely connected. There's a sense of freedom and mindfulness when I'm in the third or fourth hour of my painting. The thoughts in the first 2-3 hours, because I'm focusing, it's kind of like transcendental meditation. I did TM Vipassana for about 10 days. First 3-4 days, your brain is firing off all kinds of things.
Yeah.
A lot of things are coming to the surface. The first 3 hours of painting, thoughts, ideas, things are coming to the surface. By the fourth hour, it's like I've taken a shower. Like the mind has been showered. And so I'm in this place of presence and possibility and inspiration.
That's so neat. And way too often, I think as a professional creative or as somebody who has this specific goal of how I want my creativity to be or how I want to make a living as an artist, all of a sudden, we're not in the present moment. We're thinking like, oh my God, like I'll tell you the biggest like audition I had was for a role in Jonah Hex, which if anybody pays any attention to flops in Hollywood, that was one of them. I think it was nominated for a couple of Razzies. My scene ended up being cut and then the movie ended up flopping. Now, the way it works is that if you work on a movie, even if you work for 3 days, I think it was 3 days on set, 2 or 3 days. even though I was cut, I'm still entitled to royalties from showing up and actually being in the movie just because my scene didn't make it. So, and I'm talking to other people who've been like sort of 2 or 3 days on a summer blockbuster, and you make some pretty good money in your royalties. And I'm thinking, I have 3 little kids at home. I had bought a house right before the economy crashed, the Great Recession. And I really needed a new roof on the house, and I had no way of affording a new roof. And I thought, I went in, I booked that role. I had 3 auditions that day and I didn't feel well. And I booked 2 of them because I just didn't feel very good. And I was just like, whatever, I'm just going to rush from one to the next. All of a sudden, I was able to kind of separate the, like, I really need this. Now, I ended up getting the Jonah Hex role, which I was really excited about. I was like, oh, I'll be able to like fix my roof with my residual check. And then, of course, literally for, I think it was like an $80 or $90 million movie. It made $10 million in the box office. Nobody saw the movie. Now, I think that might have even been like global box office. It was Megan Fox and Josh Brolin and John Malkovich. And literally nobody saw that movie. So anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent, but the thing is that
I think I vaguely remember it, by the way.
Oh, that's very nice of you. But you see, there's so much attached to it. Like if I get this role, I can buy these things, I can get this thing done, I can build that to the next thing. And all of a sudden, it's so hard to just be present. And I think so many artists and creatives deal with this thing of, why are you doing this? Are you doing this so that you can be done with it and put a trophy on your mantle and say, look, like I have done it? Or are you doing it because it's what you want to be doing? And for you who expresses your craft in primarily 2, though I know also you're a writer, but primarily in these 2 places, one, there's no attachment to outcome. In which case, when you're doing it, you feel so free. The other, there is some attachment to outcome. Yeah. Is this resonating at all?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. That's why I was able to, that's why I'm able to say that when I'm in the painting, when I'm in the third or fourth hour in, or the week 1 is over and I'm into the painting, my world is happier. I'm in a happier place. But with acting, there's such did you get the job? Did you not get the job? Are you going to book this? What's going to happen? I'm 40 years old. What am I, I've made the sacrifice. You are thinking ahead. You have to think ahead. There is, and I think it's really important to have a balance and to fulfill that part of you that is able to tap in and access the presence on a daily basis. Because the very thing that we're trying to do to create, in trying to achieve, is preventing us from creating because we're not in the present moment. And I think that's what tea has been doing for me. Yeah. It's bringing me presence.
Yeah.
And it's easy to forget. Easy to forget. You think that the status quo of thinking a certain way is thinking about the future, thinking about the achieving. Having a conversation with my father, who's an Iranian man, who's thinking, what are you going to do? You're 40 years old. You don't have children. When he's come from a generation of being married at a certain age and having kids at a certain age. And then now this is a new thing for him. His son, his oldest son, doesn't have those things traditionally, conventionally, in the way that he sees it. Part of the narrative I've adopted is my father's narrative of achieving and doing. And I know that I had the most incredible conversation with him. We locked horns for a little bit, and like any father and son might. And then he told me a week later, I hadn't been speaking to him, and he wanted to reconnect. And, the one person one of the 2 people in his life that he deeply, deeply cares for is not speaking to him. He's made an effort. So he calls me up and he said, I projected my fears on you. And it was a huge thing. He had never said that to me, ever. He said, I'm sorry, I projected my fears onto you. As an Iranian man from that generation who's in his early 70s saying that to me and taking accountability for that, I can't tell you what it does for me, because I've adopted that narrative of fear and taking on his fear and then bringing it into my life.
Yeah.
So I don't have enough room to sit in that present moment and say, okay, but because my work has, been praised by a few friends that have seen it, that have had the opportunity to come here and have seen it, and my father loves my paintings, I say, well, the presence that I get when I'm painting is loved by everybody. Well, then it's working. Then I can give myself permission to be in that presence more often when I paint. But if this sucked or this wasn't good, now it's to each his own. Everybody has a different point of view. Art is up for interpretation. You might or might not think it's good or not, whatever. Yeah. But the point is, traditionally, if this was told, if somebody said, this is, majority of people are saying this is not that great. And I'm thinking to myself, well, it's giving me a lot. I feel present. I feel mindful. I feel like the dust of the world washes away when I'm in the, and I get, what happens is my sixth sense, I get to see what the painting begins to look like before I've done the painting. I start to have access to certain clues. And it doesn't just show up in my painting. It shows up everywhere else in my life. I begin to see things from the plane, from the bird's eye point of view, as opposed to somebody that's driving in a street and doesn't know what's happening in the next street that he's about to turn onto.
Right.
So, but if my parents or whoever was saying that, these paintings are not that great, then I might not continue because the influence was so great. I had adopted that narrative that my father had bought into, invested in for so long. And I know that part of that had to do with his survival mechanism, getting us out of the country and trying to give us a place and a land of opportunity. But I guess I lucked out in a way.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that narrative that you're talking about that you got from your father, as someone who, I didn't have that experience, but I think you could ask almost any creative, and that shows up in its own way in our creativity, because you're putting your soul out there, and it already takes a lot of courage to create, because you're putting something that's inside of you outside for the world to say that's not good enough. And 99.9% of the time, the world's going to say that's not good enough. And if the world doesn't say it, you're going to in its place. You're going to be like, wait, why isn't anyone telling me this isn't good enough? I guess I better be the one to say this isn't good enough. And then this of needing to have success is that the external basically validates the internal, which means the product of your work has to be good enough in air quotes in order to validate the time and the energy and the effort that you've put into it in the first place. And if it doesn't, then all of it was a waste, right? Or all of it has no place. Like, just go get a real job, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, quit trying to be something special and just be another cog in the wheel. And but what I'm saying is, I think that your experience, while it's very unique to you, I also want to say that it is, in my experience of working with other artists and creatives and with myself, is that may be the most common story. It's like, and this thing of even what your father said, first of all, brilliant. I love that. And I just want to tell you, because I've known you and your process for a while, both through your creative work, but also as your inner work. Your father, if you ask me, was able to come to that because of the work you were doing. He did not come to that on his own, because you're doing that work. You're actually giving him the space to make his growth possible. It's one of the things that's so beautiful about being an artist, is that when we actually finally hit it, when we go through that incredible, painful growth, that when we finally get there and we can actually touch somebody in some way, the other people are basically pulled up from the work that we're doing. So you both as doing your inner work and also doing your your creative work, you're pulling us with you. And sometimes you might struggle for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And then when you have that moment, and it can feel so hopeless for so long until you finally been like, I can articulate myself enough to my Father, and he's not listening to him, but I've articulated it. And articulation can be in how I speak to others. It can also be to what I put on the canvas, or it can be how I, put it on the screen. I'm articulating an idea, a thought, an emotion, a feeling, a reality, a human reality in some way that others can say, oh yeah, I can take that. And it might be a little uncomfortable to the point where you lock horns and you're like, you know what? I've said my piece. I've articulated it. I'm not talking right now. And the other person gets to go and go, oh my gosh, they actually articulated themselves in a way that now I can understand. Now I get to pick up the phone and say, hey, and that's what the entire world is, Iman. The entire world is, I am projecting my fears onto you.
That's right.
That's
brother.
The world we live in.
That's right.
And we all, as artists and creatives, actually have to be willing to deal with everybody around us treating us by projecting their fears onto us. And we have to keep going anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful, man. Wow. Beautiful.
So with that.
Beautifully articulated, man.
All right. So with that, I want to kind of like segue a little bit into your acting process. Because you, like I mentioned, you've been in a lot of things. You've been had reoccurring roles on television series. You've had big roles in small projects and small roles in gargantuan projects. And so what is tell me about your creative process as an actor.
I've always found and tried to find an opportunity or a space to act. So I've been here in LA doing this for about 18 years. The last 2 years for me have shifted in terms of auditions. I think the industry has shifted. So I'm going out for roles that I'm not bound by my ethnic background. I'm being seen for other things. Now, in some cases, it might be a liability for production not to see me, but they still might cast a Caucasian man. Yeah. But that's okay. That's still a step forward. And it's also an opportunity for me to actually get, practice, to keep the grooves going. So I've had some background. I've spent my process. I picked up a lot on when I worked with Sandy Marshall for about 7-8 years. She had her own Meisner technique. It was really powerful. One of her top students, Adam Harrington, now runs that class. And I studied with him for about a year after she left. When I start with a script, the first thing, and again, for me, it was very rigid and when I first started. So I was like, okay, this is how it goes. I have this education. I have this background. I'm going to read the script and then I'm going to take a look at it. I'm going to lay down the actions and then I'm going to lay down an objective and then I'm going to personalize it. It was very, very much that way. And I think that every project and every role that comes around, yes, I think there's a foundation that we have. But I also think that preparing for every role might be very, very different because it demands something different. So staying flexible in how we step into something is really, really important. Keeping an open mind. So what I love to do if I have an opportunity is I'm going to read the script. And I'll read it. If I have time, I'll read it a couple of times. For me, and now that I'm spending more time writing, and I just read this unbelievable book by the name of The Nutshell Technique, written by Jill Chamberlain. And she basically goes through and breaks down films. She takes 20, 30 of the top classic films and she nutshells them, she'll call it. And really, really simple technique. And it's ultimately understanding what the universal theme of that character is, because every character has an arc. The protagonist in any film, any series, they have an arc. So what is the life of that character? What is the universal theme of that character? How does that character fit into that story if it's not the main character? So I take a look at all of that. One way I like to look at it is, number one, there's so many things, so many wheels that are turning to make one machine work, right? So it's not all about me. So when I'm sitting there and what can I give? How does this character fit in to this story? And what can I bring to that character?
How can I be of service, coming back to what we talked about earlier? How can I be of
service? Exactly. And as a Dharma practitioner, as a Buddhist, I try to infuse that practice into my creative work. How can I serve? Mm-hmm. Because as somebody who was, started out acting when he was 19, there was something fun and spontaneous about it. But it became about also getting validation, being approved. The father authority, the father figure was not just in my father. It was in getting the job. It was getting into the school. The father figure was getting into the acting program and being approved that you're worthy enough. So then you spend most of your time performing and you don't trust yourself because you feel like you need to bend and turn and this and that for them to approve and validate you. So you sort of lose your voice and what your point of view is. And I think one of the most important things in creativity, especially when it comes to acting, is what's your point of view? Have a strong point of view. Don't let it be general. It makes the work specific. It paints the actions if you have a strong point of view. How do you know what the point of view is? Find out what the flaw is. Find out what the character's flaw is. And also, what's that shard of glass? The shard of glass is the flaw. It's like saying, no matter what, I will always do this. No matter what, I will never do this. And fill in the blank. Yeah. Have that point of view. Right? So I like to start from that place. Once I understand what the story is, what the character wants, because once I can tap into that point of view, then it's not about how do I deliver this line. Then that point of view carries me in everything I do. So,
that's really nice. You said something right at the beginning was like, I'm getting these auditions, which gives me an opportunity to practice. And I can tell you exactly that, unfortunately, I learned the lesson that you just shared with me a little too late in my, I moved to LA, I got my SAG card. I was in a few movies. Don't go looking for them, but they're there. When I got an audition, it was I need to go get that role. Mm. And that was actually the part that I missed, which was that every audition was an opportunity to act. And what I didn't realize is that when I wasn't getting an audition, I had every night when I put my kids to bed, I had a choice. Am I going to write? Am I going to watch something? Am I going to clean the house? Am I going to act? And I didn't do that. I wrote, I did a lot of things, but acting. And now when I look back, it's like, oh, I wasn't going to be an actor. And you know what? I may have a future as an actor. I may not have a future as an actor. I don't see it. But one of the things that I can actually bring to it now is that, do I really want to do it? Or do I want to have done it? Because if I really wanted to do it, this is how many things are stopping me from doing it. That's absolutely zero, right? But I don't do it. I could literally, when we get off of this call, I could go grab a play and I could start rehearsing a character. But I'm not going to do it because I want to have done it. I want the approval of the father figure, as it were, to be like, oh, he's good. He's making money doing it and he's got a trophy on his shelf. Right. As opposed to, I just want to be doing it. And to me, even just like listening to you during this conversation, there's this beautiful thing of like the lessons that you've been learning through tea and through painting are like, they also like deeply as they will. And I know you, I mean, you're incredibly talented, and too many incredibly talented people get to the point where like, well, I've been doing this for 21 years or 18 years in LA. Where do I go now? Whereas you've been doing, your list of credits are great, even though you also know that you, within your career, you have growing room that you really want to grow into. There's something there, but like that when you're happy doing it, when an audition is as exciting as getting a role, because the audition means I get to develop a character, then the amount of success you've already had is ridiculous, right? As opposed to still just in the place of potential.
That's right. I feel I have arrived at a level of success that I did desire earlier when I got here. And that was going out for roles that weren't just Middle Eastern. And now in the last 2 years, it's 18 years, but in the last 2 years, man, God, I've had, I got to tell you, this year was, even with COVID and the lockdown, I've had 60 auditions. And these are no miniature projects. These are all really amazing roles and big projects. And I tested for a fantastic NBC half-hour comedy by one of the executive producers of Will and Grace. It's called Hungry with Demi Lovato. And I tested. It was me and 3-4 other guys. And it wasn't for a Middle Eastern guy, but they were testing me for this. And I did this network test. It was really interesting, doing a test while you're at home and you have executives on a Zoom call. You got like 5-6 executives on a Zoom call, and you've got your backdrop and you're doing it from the comfort of your home. Is a very fascinating and exciting thing. It was actually really cool to be doing a test from home.
Was it also nerve-wracking?
It probably wasn't as nerve-wracking as it would have been if I was actually there, because you would have seen the other guys that are testing for the role. Yep. And also there's a pressure of being there. There's an anticipation. For me, I was I've created a sanctuary here. This is a big part of who I am. It's like they were coming into my home. So I felt a sense of confidence. I wasn't going to them. They were coming to me.
So I want to interrupt you real quick because when you test, that means you've already made a deal, right?
Yeah. So I had to negotiate a contract. So everybody that tests has to negotiate a contract, and you sign that contract
for literally literally tens of thousands of dollars per episode. You're negotiating, and now you're going in knowing what the consequences are of booking the role or not.
And I will tell you, it was multiple tens of thousands of dollars per episode. It would have been financially, career-wise, life-changing.
Yeah.
It was one of those. It was unbelievable when she came back and said, "This is what your test deal is." She couldn't, my manager, I'm saying my manager couldn't believe it.
Yeah. And
yes, there was a lot invested, thinking, I'm 18 years, I've been hustling, I've been here, it's been a struggle. You've made sacrifices. I have friends who are married with kids and houses and businesses and investments. And sometimes, brother, I get caught up in defining my worth and value and where I'm at in my life based on those conventional things. And then, so when you get an opportunity like this that comes to you and you do well and something clicks and you have an opportunity and things might change at this point, it's like you have some investment. And I remember not getting that part. And I think we had a men's group that night when you were there. Mm-hmm. And it was another way to practice failure, practice loss, and not get caught up in, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, this is not working out, I'm a failure. However, giving yourself the permission to feel those things. I was feeling the joy of what that contract and the amount of that contract was. I felt the joy of that, getting testing for that and all of these things. I was like, now that I didn't get it, don't suppress it. Don't get down on yourself. Just create the space and feel through it. Feel the loss as much as you felt the joy. Feel it through. Stay equanimous to that experience as well. but you don't have to identify with it, but feel it. And that was a huge moment for me, regardless of what happens to the project. That was a big moment for me because it said to me, I said to myself by doing that you're ready.
Right.
You're ready for taking something on like that.
Amazing.
You've matured. You're mature to take on something like that.
Yeah.
You know, because you can lose yourself. You can lose yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, if opportunities or whatever, you know, came around at a younger age for me, God knows what would have happened to me. I have had some opportunities here, but I didn't have the wisdom. I had, you know, I was very ego driven. All of where I'm at now and what I've arrived to is a peeling away of that ego, getting to the heart, getting to the core of things, you know, and being grateful for these moments and not getting caught up in. Yes, I will tell you, I still get caught up. It's so easy to get caught up. You know, right now I'm in a relationship, and you know, she just turned 41. I'm 40. We're thinking about a life together. Do we want to have kids? And we're both, you know, she's struggling to make her films and her TV show, and you know, and she's got a business doing an acting workshop, but we're in that space, and it's much more challenging to make those decisions when there's a lot of uncertainty still in your career.
Yeah.
So how do you keep going? You know, and I think it's really important to have those conversations, especially when you're with your partner, because that's where I'm at in my life right now. And also find a way to fulfill yourself, because if you don't, I think not having money, not being where you want to be in your career will create a lot of conflict in your relationship with your partner.
Interesting.
It can. You know?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, I want to go back and just kind of one of the last kind of questions that I want to go into, and we've alluded to it a couple of times, is that when you've lived in LA and you've worked as much as you have, and you've been in the acting classes and all of these things, we have all spent time working with people who were early on in their career and struggling like the rest of us. And then some of us have found a way to, you know, kind of get to the point where we're making a living, we're doing okay, or we're even loving our creative process, but we don't necessarily own the house or have the, you know, the beach house in Malibu, and we don't necessarily drive a Tesla. So somewhere between I'm making a living and I'm doing what I like doing, and like owning a home and going on big fancy vacations, somewhere within there, then we all know those people who have like hit the stratosphere, who have had major successes, or people who have had just, you know, a lot of people have had bigger successes, right? And it can become so easy to compare, to feel like a failure or whatever. And I just want to kind of hear your relationship to that, of actually staying present and staying engaged as an artist, as a human, as a person on your own unique path, while you're also have friends that have just like hit the stratosphere.
I butt up against that at least once a day.
That's on a good day.
That narrative has made grooves in the mind over such a long time.
Yeah.
It's going to cross your mind once a day, at least. I mean, for me, I can't speak for others.
Yeah.
But I'm also in the practice, and I really think it's a daily practice. And maybe one day it goes away. But it's the practice of being at peace with where you're at. And part of comparing myself to the status or the status quo, where my friends are, is the thing that got me into trouble. Because it's a story. And that story can get bent and twisted into a million ways. And all of a sudden it's attached to feelings. And now I believe it. So how do I prevent the story from happening before it turns into a feeling? So for me, one of the things I've been spending time doing is just being okay with not doing anything. I was so caught up in, okay, I have to do. But then when you start to tune into why you're doing what you're doing, or why you're just taking up space for the sake of taking up space because you feel unworthy, or not valuable for success or love, you start to see it, then you start thinking to yourself, wait a second, that's not true. Luckily, I have a spiritual practice that gets me to look at things from a much farther perspective and says, wait, happiness it's not in the external. It's not in the achievements, because you have gotten certain things that you've wanted. Look, I've gotten a lot of my needs met. Most of my needs are met. You know, the only thing that's standing in my way in my whole life is myself. I'm standing in my own way. Nobody's standing in my way. Yes, there's some bigger things and factors that we can't do anything about. But there's a lot of things that I can, in terms of just the way I think about myself in the world and how I orient myself in the world. So having a spiritual practice allows me to sort of peel myself out of believing that I'm a certain way and buying into that this is inherently who I am. This person who didn't make it, that's why, because of this and this and that. So getting up and meditating and creating those feelings that I like, that I feel are connected for me, that are connected to the qualities of a higher being, of a divine being, are things I meditate on and say, well, let me hold that feeling. Why do I need to wait until something happens for me to have that feeling?
So, it's so interesting because you're talking about like this making it thing. And a friend who at one point was a series regular on 2 shows. And he was like, I can't maintain this. It's too much. I'm going to have to choose one to let go. And yet you would be surprised how many conversations I had with him where he was just like, felt like a total failure because he's a little bit older than you and I. And his peers were like, and like his friends who was in a theater company with, like John Malkovich and that whole like Chicago group that came out. And all of his friends hit the stratosphere. We all know their names. And this particular friend of mine, like I said, he's been a series regular on, I don't know if you can count on, how many hands, but still feels like I haven't made it because that becomes, it's this elusive thing. Or as soon as you have, then it's like, oh, am I a has-been already? And there's all these things that go along with it. And so like, I feel like that narrative is something that is going to play in it like no matter where you are, you can feel like, I have so much further to go. Whereas at the end of the day, where most of that place where you have to go is on the inside. And so even as we kind of come to the end here, I want to say I've known you for now, I think it's pushing about 5 years. 4 or 5, I forget. But the growth that you've gone through in the time that I've known you, like to me, not when I think of like what's your, like whether or not your name is plastered all over billboards in LA or not, like to me, one of the reasons like I also love you so much and why I want you on this podcast, why I think your story is so valuable is that the successes that you've had in the time that I've known you are like radical. It's radical. We still don't know your name. We still, in fact, when I met you, and if some people go look for you, they might find you in a movie with a different name. You had a stage name for a while. And, and you were like, I'm reclaiming me. I've known you in the time where you're like, I don't need a stage name anymore. I'm reclaiming who I am. Like that is powerful, powerful work. So your success is like, as far as I'm concerned, is off the charts, even though you're not a household name and your face isn't plastered all over billboards and you don't have, millions of views on your YouTube channel or your TED Talk or whatever it is. Like that, those things are like, there's so much I think of the artist trap is I am validated by the outside or I'm validated by the completion of it as opposed to I'm daily validated by my love of the work and showing up and doing the work on a regular basis. And I think,
brother. Wow.
Right? And I think you have that. And obviously I know you still have growth to do within it because you still wrestle it like a bear. And anybody who's in the throes of like actively like anybody who's not a household name or, making, high 6 figures or 7 figures a year needs to know the Iman story in what you shared, because that then is an inspiration to say, oh, that's what success looks like. Success looks like showing up regularly. And I say regularly, I don't say daily, because sometimes you fucking need a day off. You need to be like, you know what? I'm peacing out for a minute. I need to give myself recharge. I need to give myself the freedom to not be this like push. I always, like you said, I always have to be doing, but to say, no, show up regularly. Honor yourself, your creativity, honor that you are a hero on a journey. And in every movie that you've watched, those long, terrible years in the desert are abbreviated into a montage. So we're like, I should get through this as fast as a montage. And the reality is, no, you don't get to go through it as fast as a montage. You actually have to experience it. Because if we had to watch that part of the movie, that would be the whole movie. Right? The heroes section is literally just a few minutes. Everything else is really everything else. And the part of struggle is like, that's the lifetime. Now, what's our relationship to that? And so I think that this process that you're in, and kind of tying it right back here as we're showing up, we started today with becoming present with T in the moment. You and I have shared this space and this moment. And today has been just a wild creative success. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Matthew. I will hold on to this recording, and I'm going to keep it on my rainiest days, brother, because it's a massive acknowledgement that I have a hard time seeing. And it's that battling and wrestling with that bear, that might stay around for as long as I live, but I probably might get better at it, at dealing with it and identifying with something else that is more aligned with what you just said. I'm honestly, brother, I am humbled. I am moved, and I'm so grateful for your friendship and what you offered me. I feel like, you have me come on, and you've given me a gift today. You really have given me a gift today.
Beautiful.
And I don't know how to thank you, man.
Well, we continue to thank each other by showing up in each other's lives. And for everybody who's watching and listening, check out Iman. He's headlined a couple of really beautiful independent films. Look for Iman wherever you can find him. If you happen to find him under Ethan Rains, there's a chance that you might see him under that name somewhere. If you see that name or his, watch his work. He shows up now. You know him, this little tiny bit. And I hope also that this becomes a tiny little inspiration to find that community for you, those other people who, when you get together, when you share in creative space, the lesson is actually that by the way we show up, we're both saying, I am here to serve you, and I have been served by you. Thank you. So with that, thank you so much for showing up, and have a beautiful and creative week.